A weekend away to forget for the Villa on the opening day against Bournemouth. Questions about Gerrard and Mings. Are they more Rock and Austin or Ant and Deck? But this week, attentions turn to a potentially sticky situation against the Toffees. This is Talk of the Trinity.
Until you break down.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Talk of the Trinity podcast. I am still Baz Barrett. With me, although you got to take my word for it because just an audio version this week, is Mr. Trinity himself, Will Forrest. But in terms of new season, new hope, same old results to begin with. But in terms of what does also remain the same is the high quality content you can find on our Twitter page at Talk Trinity, whereby you can keep up to date with all the latest Villa news, signings, rumours, interviews being given to the press by certain persons, which we'll no doubt come on to later. Latest polls in terms of transfers, teams, just everything you need kind of to keep on top of all things Villa. Or you can check out our YouTube channel, Talk of the Trinity, whereby our previous episodes are all there for your viewing or listening pleasure. But if you just prefer the lovely brummy tones of our audio version, or you're traveling, like Mr. Trinity right now in his car, ordinarily be like, oh, what do? I can't watch TV since that instant where my TV in the back of the car got taken away. You can go to Spotify. You can go to Apple, Amazon, Google, some other ones to listen to our audio podcasts in all their delightful pleasure. But speaking of things that weren't delightful at all, if it was Christmas, I'll be leading into saying it was ever so frightful. But we are at the start of August and it was hot. Hot on the field, hot off the field. Events at Dean Court or Vitality Stadium or sponsorship, insert name here. Saturday afternoon, Bournemouth 2, Villa 0. We'll come on to some more in-depth analysis in a moment, but just to kind of sum up the general feeling, Will, it's just a bit crap, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, and I think the crappiest thing about it is that really it wasn't surprising. We know very well, and fans of the show, the 8 or 9 of them that we've got, well, we may have a few more because we've had a lot of listens this last week. Thank you. Last episode was the highest downloaded, the Bournemouth preview. I'm rather positive. You've started to become positive, which is a worry as well. Not in a COVID sense, but still, any time that Baz is positive, you do start to worry. It was just poor to lose so abjectly to Bournemouth was very disappointing. I was watching Cadbury Athletic men's team playing, and as soon as Cadbury scored, which was within a minute of the game, my lad Jake had brought a friend with him to watch the game, and he turned to me and he went, I bet you're not that happy. And I went, why? And he went, because Bournemouth have scored. And I was like, well, you've ruined my afternoon. Thank you. Not surprising, yet very crap, as you've said.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we were both of such a positive mindset before the game, both predicting a win, I think really doubled down the disappointment watching that. I mean, in terms of my lawyers have advised me to be very vague on the details, but I did watch the game live on Saturday, so I did get to see it unfold in all its glory, or lack thereof, as the case may be. But I think in terms of the biggest disappointment for me was the pre-season. Generally, we thought we'd had a good one. We were positive in terms of getting the business done early. We were of the mindset that Gerrard's mantra of having a full pre-season to get his ideas across, get the team playing the way he wants to play, would be a positive to this team, that we'd see the improvements as compared to last season, where he came in halfway through and so perhaps had to hit the ground running and work with what he had rather than implement his own style. But watching the game on Saturday, I couldn't really ascertain any difference at all between the back end of last season, where I think the record was 2 wins out of 11. And I know you could say in terms of perhaps we lost interest a bit towards the end because it didn't look like we were going to qualify into Europe from a fairly early period. I mean, the TV lost interest in us until the last day, which is usually a good indicator that the season's meandering. I couldn't really see any difference in the performance between the back end of last season and the one against Bournemouth. And I sense we're going to have the mantra of only one game. Teams who've won the league have gone on to do that after losing their first game. So your predictions for the rest of the season, you can still predict us to win the league, Will, so don't worry about that. But it is a worry in terms of this big build-up, kind of this is going to be the moment. And you couldn't really have picked better opposition to have a statement win on the first day of the season. They were we could have got suckered into Scott Parker kind of kidology with his interviews during the week saying Bournemouth were a worse team than what they were when they got promoted because they lost players, hadn't replaced them. And they didn't really have to break too much of a sweat, really. I mean, they did literally because it was quite hot from what I could see down in Bournemouth. But in terms of, they didn't have to try very hard to stifle Villa's attacking threat because there wasn't any, even though we did have attacking players on the field. Not really much of a system. That's what worried me. Too early to be worried. Are you in the it's just one game camp, so judge it in a couple of months' time, or are the alarm bells ringing over at Mr. Trinity HQ?
There's always alarm bells ringing whenever we lose with me. You know that. It's one of those, isn't it, really, where it is far too early. It is far too early to get too worried because seasons weren't decided on one game, regardless of what anybody says. Man City didn't win the league last year because they came from 2-0 down against us. They won it because they were consistently good all season long and they got themselves into a position to clinch the title with that game.
They lost opening day last season, if you're looking for an indicator in support of your Villa win the league prediction.
Well, I was aiming for top one, so yeah. It is too early. I'll be honest with you, straight after the game I was thinking, it's all right, we've got Everton next game. Lampard seems to have drilled into his players what he wants from them, and they've got a cracking signing lined up ahead of the game on Saturday in Connor Cody. Am I worried? I'm not really too worried, but I think I'd be naive not to be not worried at all. And the reason for that is we desperately need to add to our squad. We need better quality. There's some players there who it does feel get picked on name rather than on what they're doing. So a little bit on reputation there as well. And I don't just mean Coutinho with that either. I've seen a lot of stuff on Twitter this last couple of days, really, which is Gerrard came in and he said that we were going to do things a certain way. And that one thing was you wouldn't be picked on name, you'd be picked on appearances. It doesn't seem like that's the case all of the time, I don't feel. Some of the selections were a little bit baffling, I thought, ahead of the Bournemouth game. But yeah, the probably one of the most worrying things though was that we had an 11 there that were good enough to beat Bournemouth. We had an 11 there that were good enough on paper to beat most teams in the Premier League, and we just couldn't get going. Even with all of the substitutions that we were able to do, with the dynamic players that we got on the pitch, they didn't show anything. They didn't show enough. We were reduced to long shots. Danny Ings in the first half with that clever turn, an effort that was very easy for their keeper to save. Booba with his long range effort as well in the second half. It just didn't click, did he? It didn't seem as though we were going to trouble Bournemouth. We played straight into their hands, and they got a well-deserved win in the end.
Yeah, we're going to focus on the one positive because you brought him up there. Kamara. After maybe a slightly shaky start, I think he grew into the game. Villa's best player. Not saying very much, admittedly, but he looks like what we thought we were getting. And, I think that's a signing that he's only going to get better and better with time. So that's one good thing. But in terms of the attacking players coming on, and you mentioned Danny Ings, I think I saw a stat whereby Villa threw about 25 crosses into the box at least during the course of the game. And you've got Danny Ings up front, kind of in the first half and for start of the second half as the spearhead of that attacking lineup. Watkins comes on, Arch comes on. You mentioned long shots. It was kind of the long, aimless kind of crossing into the box that was kind of concern. By comparison, Bournemouth had 8 crosses, of which they scored 1. More set his second goal. A plan, he's obviously very good in the air, and it was a very good header, to be fair to him, in terms of his goal. It was that kind of aimlessness that was worrying in terms of our attacking play, because it's in a sense of you can have the debate, and we have had the debate, and no doubt we will have the debate again in terms of during the course of this season. Should Danny Ings be playing up front? Should we get another striker? Should it be Archer? Should it be Watkins? In terms of the strikers we've got, I think it doesn't matter which one of them you put up front. If you're just going to hoof it into the box, that's just a complete waste of time, especially with Danny Ings, because he's not a target man. I mean, in terms of if you're going to have that system, you just get you might as well have Chris Wood kind of up front, the way that's going. So the fact that we have loads of creative, or relatively had a lot of creative players on the field and didn't create anything, that was a worry in terms of watching that performance. But as you said, in terms of selection issues or raised eyebrows, you mentioned there was one which took more attention than most because of what happened after the game, I would say, in terms of Tyrone Mings did not start the game on the bench. Konza played alongside Carlos. I mean, I said, there's an argument, to be fair, that Chambers probably should have played instead of Konza, but Mings was the one who didn't play. And then there were some comments by Gerrard after the game, which appeared to suggest that Mings did not play because he hadn't really, and paraphrasing slightly here, that he hadn't got over or didn't react in the manner Gerrard wanted to being stripped to the captaincy, and that he didn't think he was ready to play, and that basically he won't play again until he can, I think the phrase was, look Gerrard in the eye and convince him that he can start. After the first game of the season, a pretty poor performance. There's 2 sides to this debate, and I think it's necessary. Both sides can necessarily be true. One side is that nobody will care what Gerrard said if we beat Everton next week. The other side is that if events go down in a few months' time where, unfortunately, results haven't gone very well for Villa and Gerrard's looking at the trap door, that will be looked back at as a moment whereby, okay, that is where things began to go wrong in terms, because it was an eyebrow raiser, that comment, in terms of, I don't think it was something we expected in terms of a public calling out of your former captain, because in terms of, we had the debate previously about whether Mings was right to be stripped to the captaincy, or whether, in terms of whether that was the right call. But I think wherever your position in relation to that, I think there's one thing that you can't criticise Mings for. Certainly my experience. And as I said, we're not on the training field, so we don't know precisely. He has been a role model off the field in Villa colours ever since he joined, especially as captain and also in his professionalism. So I think going for that, it came across to me as an attack on his professionalism. My personal view is I don't think there was any need for him to have gone that far, and I think it was unnecessary and perhaps an attempt at a distraction away from a pretty poor performance. But what was your take on that, Will? Do you think we'll be forgetting about it next week when we smack 3 past Everton? Or is this going to be the marker in the sand of trouble ahead at Villa Park?
I think in regards to what you mentioned there about how maybe he wanted to deflect attention away from a poor performance and defeat, that could be correct. You know, he's laying the blame at somebody else's feet. In regards to this being a turning point and a line in the sand, I think you're correct. I think it could very well be. And for many reasons, and the one thing I'd point out, and again, I've seen Villa fans saying this, and you've mentioned it just then, Tyrone Mings is an incredibly well-respected footballer amongst not only Aston Villa, their fans, the players, the team, amongst the footballing community for his charity work, the way he conducts himself, his academies, you know, the way that he how well he did for England last summer, how well he has done for England. And there's all of this sort of, well, you know, it's a bad time for him because he got dropped by England, dropped to the captaincy, dropped by Villa. He's got, as I say, he's very well respected, and he will have a lot of people on his side in that dressing room who will be backing him and will be thinking that it was unfair for him to be stripped of the captaincy. I'd agree with that. I think it was unfair for him to be. He's a great leader. We always do very well when he's playing. I mean, you'll have seen we've won 2 games out of 10 that he hasn't played in. The last one being Norwich on Boxing Day when Conor Harahan scored back in 2019. This could, if he rubs people up the wrong way, or he says something again about Mings, or if he says anything about Ings, he's going to have problems. But if he says anything about Mings again, and it seems unjust, or if he doesn't get him back into the starting lineup for this weekend, we could start to see a bit of tension in that dressing room. I'm sure that for every player that there is that would be upset that Mings was stripped of the captaincy, that they'd be happy that McGinn had taken over, you know, another very well respected member of the squad, which we mentioned on our pre-Bournemouth episode. But he's got to be careful. He has really got to be careful. Football nowadays is a player's game. It's not like Sir Alex Ferguson, who could demand that he was the highest paid person in that dressing room, regardless of who was signed, and that he had all the power. He decided who was being brought. Football's moved on from that. Gerrard will know that from being on the back end of that as well as a player and having that player power, and people getting rid of certain players because of the power that they hold. Maybe that happened with Gerrard at Liverpool. You know, it seems as though maybe that was wanted of Mings this summer, but it's definitely concerning what he said. But he could rectify it. He could rectify it by bringing him back into the team, with us getting a win. But if he does that, it's also catch-22 for him, isn't it? Because he's shown that actually he's not as tough as he's made out in regards to his decision-making. And Mings has come and saved the day. Or, Baz, does it show that actually he's a bit flexible and that he realises when he's wrong, and he'll make adjustments or improvements to the team it's at the detriment of his own reputation.
Well, I'd just say in terms of the question of whether Mings plays on Saturday or not, we'll come on to in our Everton preview. But what I would say, if Mings does play on Saturday and we get a result, Gerrard in the post-match interview, if he's asked about it, will say, well, he looked me in the eye during the week and we had a chat and I was convinced he was ready to play and we won the game. So I was right to play him because he then took my words to heart and put in that performance, presuming he plays in a back line that keeps a clean sheet and we win. So I don't think he'll admit he's wrong, Gerrard, if he plays Mings on Saturday. But I think in terms of looking, I'm just going to rattle off a list of Villa's first 10 games of the season. Bournemouth away, Everton at home, Palace away, West Ham at home, Arsenal away, Man City at home, Leicester away, Southampton at home, Leeds away, and Forest away. In our pre-season prediction, I think we both had Villa 8th from, go and check out the episode. It's a bumper special, Premier League predictions. We run the league 1 to 20, throwing a few cups as well, and the Championship. Go and have a listen to that if you haven't already. After those 10 games, if we're about 8th, then whether Mings is in the team or not by that stage isn't going to be really talked about, I don't think. So I agree with a point that was made in terms of the group chat, Liam of the Qatar Lions, that winning will ultimately quieten this down regardless of whether Mings plays or not.
Yeah.
If we're in a position after those 10 games, because I think that's a relatively easy start. If we're in a position whereby we're in the bottom 5 or struggling at the lower half of the table, that is going to be thrown straight back in his face, especially if Mings isn't playing by that point, because then I sense you've dug yourself a very big hole kind of to get out of. So ultimately, we win 9 games on the bounce and everybody forgets. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of it struck me a little bit of him getting increasingly rassled by questions in the post-match interview. I mean, now questions about Coutinho, where he was asked about Coutinho's role in the team, and you mentioned there in terms of he's not in particularly good form at the moment, and there were questions about whether he was playing in the right place, and he gave quite a flippant answer along the lines of, well, I know Coutinho, I know where he plays, I know better than anybody kind of type things. I played with him, I know him kind of type thing. So, I mean, a manager after a game is never going to be the happiest in the world. You'd be slightly worried if they're all sunshine and rainbows kind of after a defeat. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting. The pressure is only going to increase in terms of the scrutiny on Gerrard. He gets a bit of a free ride, I think, in the press compared to other managers, because of obviously his playing days, which we have taken advantage of in terms of some players that have come in, so can't criticise that. Saying if it would have been Leeds who played like that against Bournemouth on Saturday, Jesse Marsh in charge, he would have got a hell of a lot of stick, I think, in terms of that. But yeah, eventually there's only so much protection you can get before the eyebrows are raised and the eyes are all in your direction in terms of the media, in terms of looking for a story. But we mentioned Tyrone Mings. We've mentioned Everton. We've mentioned Saturday. You can put the pieces together and say, on Saturday at 12:30, BT cameras at Villa Park for Villa v Everton. It appears to be written into the Premier League constitution that Villa play Everton at home in the first 5-6 games of the season. I think, I regularly remember over the last few years this happens. Usually we win, which is good. But before we get to our predictions, and before we talk about Villa, actually, again, Everton, a team in similar trouble, I would say, in terms of after their first game of the season. I mean, it was a 1-0 home defeat against Chelsea, but they have different issues, but quite deep-rooted issues in terms of, it was apparent on Saturday, it was a pretty terrible game, actually, against Chelsea, but Calvert-Lewin out for 6 weeks, Richarlison sold. I don't see where they're getting their goals from. So I think, to be honest, if you're talking about Mings for a moment, if you wanted to get a back line backdoor special in terms of Mings back in the team, so you could say, yep, he's contributed. I can't see Everton whacking 3 past us. Is that wishful thinking on my part, or are Everton in a real bit of trouble in your view?
I don't think Everton are in mountains of trouble. Though again, it's very early in the season, and they started well last year, didn't they? Yes, with Calvert-Lewin, it's not ideal, but then again, he got 2 goals last season. So are you really going to miss 2 goals that much?
No. I'd just say in terms of the perils of recording live, just had a bit of a cut out there, but I'm going to translate what I think Will just said along the line. I'm going to say along the lines, and hopefully Will can come back in a moment to say Calvert-Lewin, he only scored
the season, and he was also for them. I'd imagine that upsetting that. What was that? Sorry.
I was going to say you just cut out there, Will, but I'm going to have an attempt to stab at what you said, which was along the lines of Calvert-Lewin only scored 2 last season, so perhaps his influence on the team is not there anymore because he can't be expected to score goals because he hasn't for a while.
Well, yeah, actually, that's pretty much what I did say. I didn't realise I cut out. Calvert-Lewin, 2 goals last season. It's not that big of a loss, is it really, when he's only got 2? Richarlison's a bigger loss. Gordon, I would imagine, or Gray would be playing up front for them. But I think Everton are going to come for a draw against us. The back 5, Connor Cody signing for them, James Tarkowski. They've got Godfrey out. They'll put Holgate in there or Keane, and they'll play with their wing backs, Patterson and Mydachenko. And they'll go as a 5-3-2, I think, against us, or a 5-3-1-1. They'll be quite happy to try and hit us on the counter, which they attempted at Villa Park last year, but ended up getting beaten 3-0. We just got to go at them with some sort of intensity, and we need a maverick on the pitch.
I do agree with you that they will take a point. And in terms of that defensive approach, you mentioned Connor Cody. In the Premier League pre-season preview, I may have said that Tarkowski was the quintessential Frank Lampard signing. Cody is a close second in terms of exactly the type of player I'd expect Frank Lampard to sign in terms of, he's got character. I mean, in terms of, he appears to have stayed in the England squad because he can shout a bit. That's the distilling Southgate's reasons for picking him. That's the only viable reason I can see he's kind of in that squad, really. In terms of, they will pack the back, I think. I agree, 3 centre-backs. They will not really look to get too far forward, especially in the first 20, 30 minutes. They'll look to quiet us down, hit us on the break. You mentioned in terms of Villa needing some creativity and maverick. Is that your way of suggesting we need to change shape, system or personnel from Bournemouth, or do we go with the same system and players that we did last week?
All of the above. No, except for the same players. I'll go for a 4-2-3-1, which is also the formation that has been picked by the Trinity verse this week. I think we have those 4. We had those 4 defenders. They're pretty much the same. So Mings would make his way into the back line for me at the expense of Conte. I'd be having Booba and Luiz as my 2 centre mids. I think if you're going to play John McGinn, put John McGinn into the can and get him to really drive and press the back line. Though for me, I wouldn't put him in, and that's not to get your goat up, I'd have Bailey, I'd have Coutinho, and I'd have Buendia as my 3 behind any of the strikers. Obviously, Danny Ings, I think, works very well with Buendia. He's shown that before. You look at Brentford away. You look at Norwich at home. They link very well. and I think he's a clever player. And if you've got attacking midfielders who are going to put the ball on the floor and play it through, rather than trying to whip a ball into the box, he's the ideal person. But I'm not too fussed who it is up front. I just want them to give it a real go and create some opportunities for us. Really, the main things that we need for me are Buendia and Luis in that team.
In terms of the Twitterverse, Trinityverse shape formation, I would agree. I'd agree with what you said there in terms of that two. If you're playing that 2-man kind of midfield, if you're calling kind of in front of the back four, I'd bring Luis in. So I agree with you there. You mentioned in terms of if McGinn plays, he should play in a cam role. I agree. I'd play him there. I mean, I think in terms of slightly coming back to earlier points in respect of maybe authority of Gerrard potentially questioned, and people are kind of looking at those kind of big calls that he's making. I don't think you can drop your new captain after one game. I mean, I think in terms of the performance against Bournemouth, was he any good? Not really. I don't think you can say he had a particularly good game. I think you could say that for probably 8 or 9 of the players on the field, to be honest. So I think in terms of you're just asking for more questions and more comments, I think in respect of what's going on in the dressing room, what's the stability, especially if you bring Mings back. If Mings goes back in the team, McGinn gets dropped in terms of those comments. And I think that's potentially opening another can of worms. I mean, that's not to say that if McGinn has 10 bad games that he should stay in the team just because he's captain. He has to earn his place like everyone else. But I think you made that big decision to change your captain after one, during the summer. You can't go back on that after one game if you want to maintain if you don't want the risk of your credibility going potentially downhill, you got to stick to those big calls, I think. But show flexibility when you need to. And then in terms of who you play kind of alongside him in those attacking roles, I think Bailly deserves another go. I mean, I think he tried hard on Saturday, just couldn't really get him in the game, but I think he offers something different in terms of pace as well, which I think is going to be very important in terms of that back line we mentioned for Everton. Slow, I'd say. They're going to sit deep, so need a bit of pace, which he brings. I play Buendia as well. Creativity. I don't think Coutinho justifies his place in the team currently. Up front, I'd play Archer. In terms of bit of pace. I mean, and because he's got an eye for goal, as demonstrated in the pre-season games. And I think in terms of a home game, crowd's going to be up for it, especially with Archer, because it signed a new 5-year deal. So very popular amongst the Villa fans at the moment. I think it's a good game to throw him in for an hour. And then, if it's not working out, then you got Ings to come on. You got Watkins on the bench. You can switch the shape up kind of if we need a goal as well. So I would play Archer, but in terms of that's not to say that Ings was terrible and should be dropped. I just think I'd go something slightly different in terms of that home game against Everton, knowing that they're going to be quite happy with a point. I'd think.
Saying that as well, and you make a good point about Archer, and I wouldn't be adverse to seeing him up front either. He needs to have a chance at some point. And as you've alluded to there, you're old enough. If you're good enough, you're old enough. What about seeing Leon Bailey as a striker and seeing Buendia, Coutinho and McGinn behind, or potentially even seeing Archer up front and seeing Jacob Ramsey in one of those cam roles? It might be that Coutinho gets dropped or Buendia doesn't make it in as we'd like him to. Do you think that could be an option? Do you think it would be a good option? Or if we're going to be going for the crosses into the box again, and the chances are we will, there were 31 crosses into the box against Bournemouth. And we know that he likes to get Cash and Din forward and Kamara sitting deep. What about Keenan Davis? Could he lead the line against an Everton defence that's going to be a tough, strong defence? And if he's got the runners off him who can get onto his little knockdowns, is that worth a go?
I'd say in terms of Bay up front is an option, I think, if Gerrard doesn't want to lose face by dropping Coutinho. Because then I think, as you said, the natural lineup would be Coutinho and Buendia behind Bailey. In terms of Davis up front, my concern about putting Davis up front with Everton, who are going to play three at the back, Tarkowski is a man mountain in terms of knocking him up to him, kind of, however good Davis is in the air holding up the ball, Tarkowski, Premier League experience, that's his bread and butter, as it were. Cody, similar in terms of that. So I don't think you would have to have very quick players. You'd have to have Bailey around there. You'd probably agree in terms of if you got Davis up front, you'd have to play Ramsey for pace. You know, him, Bailey, kind of behind there. My concern with that then would be having Ramsey slightly out of position, Davis coming in kind of for a first start for quite a while. So that would be the concern. But in terms of the ref is putting up the board for added on time here. 3 minutes to go. So we're going to go straight for the predictions now. We've had the downheartedness. We've had the, I'm not sureness. We've had a little bit of positiveness. Are we going to make it all positive come half two Saturday afternoon with a Villa win?
We're going to win 3-1 on Saturday. I think we're going to really go out of the blocks to get the fans on side, get into quite a quick early lead, and I think we'll have 3 goals probably before half time, and we'll inevitably then try to start to dictate the game. Everton will score late on. They'll put us under a little bit of pressure, but ultimately we'll see it out because of the substitutions that can be made. So I'm going to go for a nice big 3-1 Aston Villa win, which in my predictions league keeps them comfortably top.
Well, in good news for Villa fans, I am not going quite as positive as you. Bad news is... So the bad news is I'm going to go for a Villa win. I think it's going to be... Yeah, there we go. It's going to be... I think I'm going to go 1-0 Villa. Second half goal, scrappy from a corner, you know, kind of a screwball scramble in the box. Then we hold on. Mings is saluting the whole end at full time, chest bumping. Gerrard's doing his best David O'Leary impression at St Andrews, kind of coming up to 15, 20 years ago now. So I'm going to go 1-0. 1-0 Villa, which also would keep Villa top. So I'm going to say on that bombshell of a finish, keep up to date with all the Villa news on our Twitter page at Talk Trinity, on our YouTube channel Talk of the Trinity, on our audio providers, Spotify, Amazon, Google, others that I have no doubt forgotten during this moment. But from me, thank you very much for listening. We do appreciate all the listens, retweets, subscribes. And for a quick final word, I'm going to pass you over to lightning quick Mr. Trinity himself.
Cheers, Tar. Thank you very much. Nice one for listening. Let's get these episodes up to 100. I'm Villa till I die. He's Villa till he dies. We don't like it when he's positive. Once a fucking again, up the Villa.